Hi there, I'm Somayya Upal. I'm a first-year medical student at Boston University Trivandrum School of Medicine. Just a little bit about my background. I'm in a couple of labs. I'm in a neurodegeneration lab at the VA clinic, the Jamaica Plains location, where I do like database consolidation, run EEGs, that kind of thing, interact with patients. And I'm also in a religious cognition lab, which is more fun and experimental. So with these two kind of background, I'm going to talk to you about this idea that I have that dissociation isn't inherently pathological to cognition.
We don't see the screen.
Oh no, there's no screen. It's just me on the screen. And it may be correlative to variables of creativity. So dissociation is one of those phenomenological features that I can describe to you the best that I've experienced, but I can't really like go into your brain and test it on a quantifiable measure, usually anyway. In psychology and whatnot, though, it is one of those factors that we ask often for like DID, for schizophrenia, it's related to a lot of symptomatic features, but we don't have a good way of trying to figure out like what it actually is. So I'm trying to posit one way of thinking about it. So dissociation is a way of describing it is that it is a loss of autonomy. If you're losing autonomy with your senses, if you're losing autonomy with your body, in some way, my spatial recognition of myself is detached from reality, yeah? So I'd like to also use dream cognition as a way of talking about how this might be related to creativity in the mind. By examining the way that dissociation restructures our capacity for simulations, in that we're able to run models in a new sense. We can see that in dream cognition with supernatural breakages. So I currently am coding like thousands of dreams for physical law breaks and whatnot. And that's similar to like hallucinations, similar to hallucinations in Parkinson's and schizophrenia and whatnot. And that basically posits that your external simulation in the dream is offering something that wouldn't normally happen in the real world, I'd like to say, right? So we're looking for if highly dissociative individuals therefore have higher rates of those cognitive breaks and whatnot. And this actually relates to Auguste's earlier presentation where he talked about transformation drive. And this is how I kind of relate this to AI and whatnot and how we think about cognition as a whole. Because maximizing novel configurations is one of the most important steps for cognitive growth of any of these organizational systems, of any organizational matter. The evolution, the genomics, everything we've been talking about like throughout these many conversations and whatnot. So as a medical student though, and as someone very pragmatic about, my physical sense, I also do feel that there is something to making sure to consider the pathology and the ways it can go wrong. So I guess I'm bringing this up as a discussion because maybe AI could be trained more on these law breaks, on these kinds of more experimental informations, which may in turn increase hallucinations and whatnot, which may in turn increase other symptomatic things similar we see in ourselves, but it could also increase simulations which result in the states that we often quantify or we subjectively call like ecstasy flow and trance states and whatnot. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. I have a lot more other words and whatnot, but I'd rather hear questions or hear thoughts.
Since she was quick, can we give her a few more opportunities for audience questions?
Yes. Audience questions.
If you guys have any, or if you have any thoughts, yeah.
How would you like to see this as someone studying in medicine implemented on a clinical scale when we have models trained on these things?
I guess implementation I'd want to think a lot more about because that's where you actually have like a lot more consequences and ramifications and whatnot. But in terms of implementation of how I treat my patients, how I talk to people, how I engage with consciousness as a whole, understanding that these outlier factors may actually be a sign of a new type of intelligence and being more open to them as, like everyone in this room, talking with you guys, I've seen like such interesting outliers and types of intelligence. So dissociation or that ability to reframe how we normally conceptualize the world or split it in a way might actually be the way to do that.
I'm thinking they might be helpful diagnostically as well as just integrating, as you alluded to, our neurodiversity. The AMI might be on a large enough database that it could make inferences about capabilities that's harder for us to identify around the particular flavor of neurodiversity.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you talk to ChatGPT, Claude AI, if you talk to it about neurodiversity, it is very interesting, especially if you try to include it in the conversation, because that's how I try to get it to justify certain things about itself. I'm like, well, but isn't that like if you were experiencing with less empathy, or if you cognitively had certain parts of the brains that were mapped differently, like we can see. Anyway, I agree with that. Anything else? Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned how dissociation can be like pathological, and also how it can be very helpful and with drive creativity and growth. So have you seen any like how is there anything you can think of to go from one to the
Yes,
other?
I do see those. And that's what we talked about yesterday with Bach, actually, about the synesthesia, about certain types of autism maybe being neural networks layered on top of one another and having connections form in the short term. So like what I brought up yesterday during the conversation was that stimming and dancing, there are similarities there about this type of movement. We feel these certain like physiological sensors which feel kind to people across the spectrum of intelligences and neurodiversity. So I do think that there are things like scent in sense, that's across cultures. I'm also like into anthropology, so that influences a lot of the way I look at the world, but you look across cultures, you see rhythmic dance, you see sense, colors, so I do think there are correlates, and we naturally are trying to figure this out. The cognitive attractors, I think they're sometimes called.
All right, well, one last. Kurt, you mentioned you were a part of a religious lab, something like that. What's the relationship between that and dissociation?
Yeah, so the religious cognition lab I'm in, that's actually one of the guys who invited me here, was supposed to speak the other day. Luca Del Dio, he and I work there, and we code, and we would interview patients about their conceptions of existential abstracts, because I am like a medical student, so it's very much like trying to turn it into stigmatized terminology and whatnot. Theists, atheists, anyone can interact with the lab. But it relates because we do a lot of dream data. We do EEGs on the people and whatnot, and then we look through the symbols and whatnot, and we have we have interviews about their turning points in their life. And then we try to find kind of correlates, like, this is traumatic stuff that has happened in your past. We see these happening in your dreams. Obviously, it's like really experimental and whatnot, and how you're making sure to do it, but not do it in like a Freudian way or something. So, but it's a very fascinating place to be.
Where is this?
It's called the Cognitive Neuroscience of Religious Cognition Lab.
Where?
National University, I think it is. McNamara is the PI, and he's at Boston University School of Medicine, so that's how I got to know him, but yeah.
What's the opposite of dissociation? Is it being present? And if there's something positive about being dissociative, is there something negative about being too present?
No, that's so true. I think you can be too present. That's like overstimulation, right? When I'm in a room and I feel all these noises and I'm like, wait, I cannot even find a place of peace.
Yeah.
So I don't want to like make one seem more negative and one more positive. I think they're very systematic. And there is something that I'd like to call narrative intelligence, where people are able to utilize those skills. Do I want to be close to the situation, or do I want to be away? So, yeah. And I think doctors especially use that. Just one last point, I would love to study physicians' minds, especially like an ER doctor versus like a pathologist versus a sleep medicine specialty. They're very interesting, yeah.
You're talking about the two different states and switching between them. Have you found any research on how to do that?
I wouldn't say there's like hardcore research, nothing that I've personally found, but I think anecdotally you can find. And again, in anthropology or cultural sociology, you can find more evidence of how different cultures have utilized this. But personally, I don't know a great like meta-analysis I would suggest. Yeah.
You may be interested in taking a look at the predictive process framework if you haven't.
Oh, yeah.
That are ready.
Yeah.
And this concept of narrative shifts reminds me of precision reading too, and being able to apply the right precision.
I'd love to talk after about
Yeah.
that. That sounds great.